Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be taking a look back at week 16 of the Overwatch League 2022 season. Oh boy, what a strange and bizarre week it was. A lot of major surprises. Games that did not go the way we were expecting them to go. So let's talk about what happened. Let's real quick throw out my picks that you can see from last week or this past weekend. And oh boy, 9-7 overall, 1-1 in the big picks. What a bizarre week it was. Let's jump in and let's talk about what happened in the matches. So the first match of the weekend was the Guangzhou Charge against the Shanghai Dragons. New look Guangzhou Charge roster. I think they look a lot better with this roster and this lineup. We'll talk about their game against the Valiant that they did actually manage to win when we get there. But I think the Dragons look pretty good in this meta. No Fleta on the Junker Queen, sadly. They had Void on the Junker Queen. I thought he looked pretty good. Who Are You had a great showing this weekend. He looked fantastic. Lip on the Sojourn on the Ashe, still looking pretty good. So Dragons looking like a very solid team still. I think this is a very good tournament for them. If they continue playing the way that we saw them playing this weekend, I thought they looked very good, very solid. So all in all, good showing from them. Second match of the weekend was my first big pick game. It was the Hangzhou Spark versus the Seoul Dynasty. It was a win for the Seoul Dynasty, a very one-sided 3-0 win for the Seoul Dynasty, so predicted that one wrong on my end. However, I don't feel that bad about it. One, Alfie didn't play. If I had known Alfie was not going to be playing in these games, I definitely would not have picked the Spark to beat either of these two teams. So, you know, it happens, but Architect just didn't have that same showing and that same kind of firepower that we see from Alfie. The Dynasty, I thought it was really funny. I had a lot of people kind of looking at this match in general. I think a lot of people would have expected Prophet to be playing in this match. He did not play the DPS role, but he did play the Brig for the Dynasty, and we instead saw Fitz and Stalker as the DPS players, and Stalker's Genji looked incredible. Fitz looked very good, and I thought that Prophet's role on the Brig was actually pretty noticeable. You know, they didn't play creative at all in these matches. They played Vin Damon and Prophet as their support line the entire weekend, and they looked really good. So the Seoul Dynasty certainly on the up and up. I think that they, well, not really on the up and up. They had the best overall record in the APAC region, so they're not really on the up. They already look very good, but I think that this was a really good tournament from them this weekend, a very good showing from them this weekend. I think that the rotations that they use in terms of their players, I guess they're going to rotate, they get a very consistent roster. But I thought it looked very good. So the Dynasty, I think, looking right now like a really strong team in this region. Vancouver Titans were victorious over the New York Excelsior. Oh, New York, they just took a major step back this weekend. They looked not very good, but also the Titans really stepped it up once again, continuing their success and getting their second win of the season, back-to-back games with wins. I thought that King looked very good in this matchup with a win, essentially really as the big carry piece on this roster. Aspire also incredible, but King really did a great job singling out Gangnam Jin on the Brig, and really very lack of any real effectiveness from Gangnam Jin in this series. Vancouver Titans, legit. They're a legit team. They look very good in this meta. This meta is one that I think they will do very well in. I think it favors what they do very well. And I think that the Vancouver Titans are a team that you should look at as a very solid team going forward. I think they are, right now in this meta, probably a top 5 team in the West. And that sounds a little potentially out there, but I think they look very good in this meta. I think this meta was built around the strengths that they have in their roster. And I think the addition of King, absolutely the right move for this team. They look a lot better right now. So all in all, I think the Titans are looking very good as we move into the Summer Showdown. I think they're going to have a very good showing in this tournament. San Francisco Shock were victorious over the Boston Uprising. I said last week I wanted to see Mag play this weekend, and they did play Mag, the Boston Uprising, that he played all of the maps they played this weekend. And I thought that he actually looked pretty good. I think there is definitely going to be a lot of criticism for this team and a lot of things with the way that they handled the situation this weekend with Punk, or I guess historically the way they've handled Punk. And I've always just kind of been of the impression, like, if you're Punk, why are you still on this Uprising roster, right? Like, just leave the team. Like, the team obviously is not going to prioritize you because they want to prioritize strong communication. And I think there is a lot more reason why the addition of Mag is beneficial to the team in the long run. I think that the addition of Mag is not simply for this season, it is for the long run. I don't think that Punk is in the vision for the future of the Boston Uprising. So I think if I'm Punk, yeah, at the end of the season, I am going to leave. I think that the Vancouver Titans would have been a great landing spot for Punk if they had tried to deal him. But I think that they still like having Punk around because he's a very talented player. But I think the reality is, don't expect the team to have your best interest at heart, and keep you around and be like, oh, well, you want to play, so we'll let you play, when the team is going to do what they think is best for their success. And whether or not you agree or disagree with the fact that the team has not managed to find much success without Punk in the lineup, they weren't going to win these games anyway. Even if Punk played, they weren't going to win. And so to me, I think it's the type of thing where if I'm the Uprising, moving forward, I probably won't keep Punk around. And if I'm Punk, expect that and use that as leverage to try to find a spot for next season that I think will favor you more as a player. That's kind of my takeaway from this. Because look, you're playing against the Shock. Like, Punk wouldn't have won against the Shock. He wouldn't have even won a map. Shock are better than the Uprising. It's not even close. Punk would not have made a difference in this weekend, I think, ultimately at all. I think it really is a very clear-cut thing with this matchup here. The Shock are the better team. The Fuel were the better team. Accept what you can, and just, I think, go forward, look for a different spot if you're Punk. I think that's really the move. I don't expect Punk to get much playtime the rest of the season, if any at all. I think they're going to roll with Mag. I think that's the smarter move. I think it's the right move. I know people would disagree with me on that. I think it is the better move, though. I think you have to roll with Mag. I think he's the better piece. I think he provides more for your team. I think he's a more complete player on the full lineup of tanks, so I think you just roll with Mag going forward. Final match on Friday was the Dallas Fuel victorious over the Toronto Defiant. Pretty good showing from the Defiant. Obviously a loss there, but Fuel right now I think are a top 2 team in this meta. I'll talk more about where I kind of would put a lot of these teams as we get a little bit closer to the tournament itself, and maybe a little bit later in this video I'll kind of talk more about my personal kind of opinions of where teams are. But I think the Fuel look very, very good. I think the Defiant are a pretty good team as well, and obviously they had a really big win at the end of the week. But I think that the Fuel really are solidifying themselves. I think this meta works very well with what they're good at. It allows Hanbin to have high impact. It allows Sparkle to have high impact. I think you don't need Edison to have as high of an impact, which I think is good for this team. Chio and Fielder both look very good in the support role. I think that helps them out a lot. So Fuel, I think, are a very serious team this tournament. I'm kind of curious to see kind of how they close things out, but I think they're one of the favorites coming out of the Western region to win the Summer Showdown when we get to Toronto. I cannot speak today, so we'll see how this goes. Moving on to Saturday, Seoul Dynasty, big win over the Chengdu Hunters. 3-0 once again. Same lineup for the Dynasty with Profit in the support role, Stalker and Fitz in the DPS. They look very, very good. I think they look like a very good team right now. Curious to see what happens when they match up against the Fusion and the Dragons later on in the tournament cycle. I don't know when they play them exactly. I don't know if they play them next week or the week after. I'm sure one of those games at least is next week, but it'll be interesting to see what happens with the rest of the way for the Dynasty. But, they also still have to play the Charge and the Valiant, which I think are very winnable games. I think that the Dynasty should be favored in both of those games, so definitely going to be interesting to watch. The Hunters rolled out with some weirder stuff in this series. They ran some Pharah. I think they ran some Winston or Wrecking Ball. I don't remember exactly what it was. It didn't really work. It worked for a point, and then the Dynasty turned it around, and it was a series win for the Dynasty. But we'll talk about the Hunters again with their series against the Fusion, because I think that series really was one to take a lot away from. Shanghai Dragons beat the Hangzhou Spark. Rough week for the Spark. I think when Alfie comes back, the team will be a lot better. I think Alfie really is a very big part of this team and their success. I think he's probably the best player on this team this season outside of Shy. And I think that if you have that DPS lineup that's looked as good as it has so far this season, I think this Spark roster will look a lot better. So I would expect when Alpha E comes back, this team will look pretty much as good as they have so far historically, and I think this team will look a lot better once again when Alpha E comes back. Shanghai with Who Are You are a very real threat, though. I think that this meta works really well with what Shanghai's good at. And I think you're looking at Shanghai and Seoul as the top two teams in the APAC region right now. Both of these teams look incredible. They both have a very high-performing Genji right now, and I think that Void and Smurf have both looked very, very strong on the Junker Queen, so I think it's a very good look for both of these teams. Definitely excited to see them play. I don't know if they play next week or they play the week after. Let me check real quick. They do not play next week, so they will play the 4th week. It is actually the last APAC match of the weekend on September 4th. So mark your calendars. Labor Day weekend, big match between Dragons and Dynasty. That's probably the most exciting game, though, I think, going forward in this APAC region for this tournament cycle. Both these teams look like the best two teams right now. Kind of on a crash course. I would not be surprised if those two teams are both undefeated when that matchup comes. It'll be fun to watch as these teams are doing really well right now. But definitely Dragons and Dynasty right now are looking like they can compete with some of the best teams in the Western region in this current meta. Final APAC match on Saturday was the Philadelphia Fusion against the LA Valiant, a 3-2 series went the distance. Fusion narrowly managing to take it. LA Valiant with a very, very bizarre starting lineup that seemed like you had no idea what to expect, but actually worked pretty well. Dia, arguably top 5 Junker Queen in the league. He looks really good on the hero. His accuracy with the knife is very, very high, but I don't think the team around him necessarily looks nearly as good. They had Sashin on the Brig, which I just did not think looked very good. Becky had a pretty good performance as well. I thought he showed up decently in this weekend. I didn't love Easyhan. I thought he was fine. Obviously, with Dia on the Junker Queen, you have to go with somebody else. I'm kind of interested to see if they would try innovation at all in the role. I'd say it's unlikely because I don't think he's as good on the Ashe and the Sojourn as Easyhan is, but I wasn't super impressed by Easyhan this weekend, so it is what it is. Fusion, Carpe looked okay. Didn't look amazing. Fury looked okay. He had made quite a few mistakes. Kind of killed himself quite a bit on the Junker Queen, so they have some improvement and room to grow, but Zest, man, his Genji is absurd. It's disgustingly good, so I'm interested to see kind of how this Fusion roster bounces back from this weekend. It wasn't very good. We'll talk about their second match later on, but this match was a tough one for them, but they managed to pull it out, and I think that's really what matters, that they won the game that they probably should have won more likely than the other one. London Spitfire, big win over the Houston Outlaws on Saturday. Spitfire, also right now, I'm going to say it, they could also be a top 5 team in this meta right now. It gets tough because I think you have to look at a team like Atlanta, we'll talk about later. Atlanta right now isn't really at full strength. I think with the addition of Vigilante and with Speedily coming of age next week, I think we'll see the Reign take another step. I thought Vigilante played very well this weekend, but we're not talking about the team right now. But Spitfire look as well like they may be a top 5 team in this meta right now. They beat the Outlaws. They beat the Uprising. They did lose to the Mayhem, though the Mayhem, that one was odd. I don't know what happened there. Spitfire, I think, look more comfortable now. I think they've adapted a little bit more. They look a lot better. Outlaws are struggling. This team beat the Gladiators. It's mind-boggling, honestly. It really is. I just think that the Outlaws do not look great. Pelican had a good series. I think Merritt's been playing fine, but I don't think the support line is having a particularly fantastic series, and I think that Dante's Junker Queen is not as effective as a lot of the other ones are right now. It's tough. A lot of teams that have been pretty good have been struggling, and teams that have been struggling a little bit more have started to look better. So it is obviously a weird meta. A lot of people are not happy with this meta, so who knows what really is kind of the reality of this meta and really kind of what we can take away from it is very difficult. But it was a good performance from the Spitfire. I thought they had a pretty good weekend, and I think that this match in particular, obviously it was the only match they played this weekend, was a pretty good showing from them, and one that really kind of solidified them, in my opinion, as a team towards the upper level of this tournament cycle. When we talk about two teams, though, that seemingly are on opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to this tournament cycle, we have the Shock and the Gladiators. The Shock victorious, their 19th straight regular season win, which means next week they have a chance to win their 20th straight, which would be the new record, which would be the Vancouver Titans record from 2019. They're currently tied with that record. So Shock have a lot to play for, obviously, next weekend, and I'm sure they're going to win that game, but we'll talk about it later in the week. Shock look very good right now in this meta. They look very comfortable. I think that they somewhat surprisingly have played very well. Gladiators do not look very good. Even with the addition of Happy, the team is still struggling. The reality is, I don't think that the addition of Happy ultimately fixed the real problems that the Gladiators had this weekend. Their weekend this weekend was worse than their weekend last weekend, and they lost both their games last weekend. They lost both of their games this weekend by even worse margins. I don't think the support line for the Gladiators are playing particularly well. I think Funny Astro has been picked out first way too often for this team to be a very competitive team. Reiner I think he looked better this week than he did last week, but his support was just not there. He wasn't getting the support he needed to stay alive, and it was very frustrating to watch at times. I don't know what the answer is for this Gladiators roster. I don't know if putting Shu in on the Brig would be better or worse for this team, but I don't think they look particularly good on the support side of things. Kevster still looked good. Happy looked really good. I'm not worried about that side of the team. I just don't think that these supports look particularly good, and I think that as a result is hurting Reiner's performances as well. Like I said, I thought Reiner did not look very good last weekend. This weekend, I think it was way more on the supports. I think they really, really, really struggled in this meta and in this weekend, and I think that we are seeing a pretty scary trend for the Gladiators roster. They definitely do not want this meta to persist. We have reason to believe it won't, of course, because Aaron Keller came out and said that they're going to have a patch before the Countdown Cup, so it'll be a different meta there, but rough weekend from the Gladiators. Really poor showing from them in the Junker Queen meta. Florida Mayhem fell to the Washington Justice. Not only lost big, and I'm honestly really wondering why last weekend the Washington Justice didn't play Assassin on Genji. He looked incredible on Genji. I don't know why they had Decay on Genji. It makes me even more annoyed about how this... The Shock should not, honestly, like, I would make the argument the Shock shouldn't even have had the opportunity this weekend to tie the Titans win streak. Because if Assassin was playing Genji last weekend, I don't think the Justice lose that series. I just think Assassin's Genji was so good. They looked so good with Kalios in the playing Junker Queen. They looked still good with Krillin in. I thought the Decay looked really solid on the Sojourn. So I don't know why Justice didn't play Assassin last weekend. It really boggles my mind. I'm really proud of this Justice roster for getting that win when they looked to be struggling. Obviously, they just got rid of 3 really big names from their roster in Mag, Vigilante, and Happy, but they still managed to come up with a win. They know they're in a really tough spot. So I honestly, like, my performance of the weekend goes to this Justice roster for winning when nobody thought it was even possible. And I believe now they have won 2 in a row. It's been a rough season for them so far, but 2 in a row for them. Justice roster, honestly, I'm very impressed with what they did and happy for them. Mayhem did not look very good. They played Hydron at first. They switched over to XC. Neither one really did anything that really kind of changed the course of this team. I just don't think they look very good. And I think that they're going to continue to probably struggle in this meta because I think that they just don't have the level of star power and oomph that you want out of this roster based on what we've seen from them historically. I just think that they don't really have that. They're a well-coached team, but I think their talent is really just kind of struggling against some of these other teams that just have, I think, frankly, better talent. Guangzhou Charge victorious over the LA Valiant on Sunday. Their first win since week 1 when they beat the LA Valiant. I think that Jimmy looks really, really good on this meta. Like, his Sojourn's really good. I think his Ashe is also really, really good. So I think it's going to be really cool to see how Jimmy continues to perform as time goes on. I thought that Xerneas played well. I thought that the team overall played very, very well in this meta. Krong played well. I think it's a very solid look for the Charge roster. Valiant, once again, the same lineup with Sasha and Brig. I don't think that's the answer. I don't think that's the way forward. I think I'd rather see a DPS player there or Molly as opposed to Sasha. I don't think Sasha had a particularly good weekend. So good on the Charge. I predicted this one. I thought it would happen. I thought the Charge roster looked better with this new look they have, and they certainly do. And I'm curious to see if they can continue some of this success going forward. Maybe they can find wins against teams like the Hunters, like the Fusion, like the Spark, who don't look incredible right now. And so maybe the Charge can have a nice run here late in the season and try to jump the Valiant in the standings. We'll see what happens, though. Valiant, when they lose, they don't usually lose very big, so that's kind of the problem the Charge have to overcome. But if you get more wins at them, or than them, doesn't really matter. Chengdu Hunters were victorious over the Philadelphia Fusion, and not only victorious, it was a 3-0 win for the Hunters. Fusion, much rougher showing in this matchup. Fury did not look nearly as good. Zest still had a decent showing, but he wasn't able to do as much as he normally would. Carpe and MN3, they did a switch that didn't really work all that well. I think MN3 probably should have played the Ashe instead he was playing the Sojourn. Aim God kind of had a rough weekend, or at least a rough match here. Chengdu looked decent, but Leave had an absolute carry performance. Leave looked the best he's looked all season. He looked back to the 2021 MVP form that we saw from him last year. He looked incredible on, even on like the Widow looked really, really good. So Leave, when he can play like that, the Hunters can really do a lot. Fusion have struggled against Chengdu this year. Some of that happens. Obviously, matchups are tough for some teams sometimes, but considering Chengdu, realistically, they're 4 points behind the Fusion despite only having one less win. The Fusion just had much better tournament showings, so they are still pretty far ahead of the Hunters, but the Hunters just got to make it into the play-ins, and they could obviously have a good playoff result that potentially knocks out the Fusion. So Hunters are not a team that I'm going to write off yet. I'm definitely not going to say that they're out of things yet, but I will be intrigued to see kind of what happens as the season progresses. I still don't like their flexibility that I think doesn't really exist, and I think that it's going to hurt them a bit, but I think overall they look okay, and if Leave keeps playing like that, they'll be fine. Dallas Fuel beat the Boston Uprising. I kind of talked about it a bit before. Pretty good showing, I think, from the Fuel. Uprising managed to take a map, which was a good showing, I think. I think Mag is going to make this roster better ultimately, like I said. I think that is the way forward. I don't love the DPS line for Dallas, or sorry, for Boston. I don't think Victoria and Valentine are really going to bring you the success you want. I think you need more firepower on that DPS line. I don't think we're going to see Seeker play because I think they're going for a Korean roster at this point in time. So why would you even play Seeker at this point in time? It really just doesn't make sense. So, it is what it is. That's really, to me, the biggest problem with the team. That's where they need to make changes. But the Fuel look good. This meta is really good for them. I expect them to continue their success going forward as we move on to getting closer to the Summer Showdown. Atlanta Reign get their first win this tournament cycle, beating the new look Paris Eternal. Paris definitely struggled a bit. I think a lot of it's nerves. A lot of the time we get a new roster like this, teams struggle early on. I certainly would not write off the Eternal going forward, and definitely the possibility to kind of improve their performances as we get closer to later in the season and this potential meta as well, where they have a lot more experience. We'll see what happens. It's hard to learn from a team that plays one match in a weekend, and it's the first time we're seeing them. And it's against Atlanta Reign, who are really, really good, and Kai had a gargantuan, on Watchpoint Gibraltar, he had 81% accuracy with Sojourn or something like that. Absolutely unreal performance from Kai. He played an incredible match. And so it's really hard to take a lot away. But like I said about the Reign, I think they're in an interesting position. Vigilante looked pretty good for the team. I think he brings some extra kind of life into that support line on that Brig role that I don't necessarily think Ultraviolet was bad at, but I think Ultraviolet just gives you something there. Or, sorry, Vigilante gives you something that you didn't have. But the real thing next weekend is going to be that they get Speedily, finally, he is of age, literally the day that they play their first match next weekend. So I don't know if Speedily will play next weekend. I would be surprised if he doesn't. I think Speedily is such an incredible player. He's one of the best talents of the Western region in the past several years. He is an incredible player who will very likely have a major impact for the Reign if they want to have a good showing in Toronto in the Summer Showdown. So keep your eyes on the Reign next week because they might start turning that dial up, turning that knob in their favor. I think it's very possible for them. Final match of the weekend was the big, shocking result, I think, of the weekend, which was the Toronto Defiant 3-1 win over the LA Gladiators. And I said last week that I was very impressed by the Defiant, and I thought that the Defiant looked pretty good. And I thought that they were a team that looked to be on the rise to potentially have a very nice-looking tournament. I did not think they would beat the LA Gladiators, however. But not only did they beat the Gladiators, they beat them 3-1. It was a very good series from Toronto. Their defense on Dorado was one of the best defenses I have ever seen. They played very, very well. I think this meta favors the Defiant for a number of reasons. Hisu has had some very good performances. I think Hotba is the perfect type of tank player that you want on Junker Queen. He has a lot of experience playing DPS in the past. He was a very good Roadhog player. So he knows how to play a damagey, very damage-heavy kind of tank like Junker Queen is. So I think that the Defiant should be pretty good in their own tournament. I think that when we get to the Summer Showdown, they are a very real, potentially dangerous team. Like I said, I think they are in the top 5 right now in the Western region. I'd say it in a rough order. Your top 5 right now is Shock, Fuel, Defiant, Spitfire, and Titans. Those are your top 5. I think right now in this region, I think the Reign are number 6 right now. I think that they probably will look better once Speedily comes in. We haven't seen that yet, so I definitely will keep my eyes on them. But I think right now the Defiant look very, very good. Gladiators, not very great in this meta. They are 0-4 so far. They had a very rough outing against the Defiant. They had a rough outing against the Shock. Obviously got reverse swept by Houston, and Houston doesn't really look that good right now. And they lost, got reverse, or not reverse. They almost reverse swept Houston and lost, and almost reverse swept Dallas and lost. They don't look very good, right? Just simply put, they don't look very good. Support line does not look very good. Reiner is struggling as a result. I think Kevster and Happy still look fine, but I think the Gladiators definitely not looking great in this meta. They probably won't make the Summer Showdown. It's not impossible, but it's very unlikely at this point. So definitely a worrying sign, potentially, for the Gladiators as we go towards playoffs. If the meta is anything similar to what we're seeing, we might not see a great showing from them. We might see a very, very rough rest of the season for them. But who knows exactly. That's going to be it for this video. If you guys enjoyed, consider liking and subscribing, leaving your comments down below about anything you thought about what I talked about. 2 more weeks of qualifiers, then we get a Summer Showdown. We get a live audience once more, so I'm excited for that. So hopefully this week things become a little bit clearer and we kind of know what's going on. But that's going to be all for this one. Thank you all once again. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.